picture this. Plunge yourself right into this moment with me. It is the morning of May 18th, 1989.
Right.
You are standing inside a highly secure war room in Ethiopia's Ministry of Defense.
Oh, wow.
And the air is just thick with tension, probably smelling of stale coffee and sweat.
Yeah, that classic crisis room atmosphere.
Exactly. And all around you are the highest-ranking generals in the nation, men who command thousands of troops. And they are agonizing over this single, just fateful decision.
Because a plane has just taken off from the runway.
Yes. And it is heading straight for the border. And sitting on that plane is the ruthless dictator of Ethiopia, Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam.
The stakes literally could not be higher.
Right. Now, here's the impossible choice facing these generals. Do they shoot down their own head of state to seize power and end his brutal regime? Or do they let him go?
Right, because shooting down a commercial airliner means killing innocent civilians.
Exactly, and completely destroying the international reputation of their national airline.
It is the ultimate high-stakes dilemma, and the clock is ticking in real time.
It's just a total pressure cooker.
Oh, yeah. Every passing second means that aircraft gets closer to clearing Ethiopian airspace. They literally have minutes to decide the fate of a nation.
Which is just wild to think about. And the source for our deep dive today is this fascinating, deeply tragic retrospective essay published in the Ethiopian Tribune.
Yeah, they released it to mark the 36th anniversary of this exact moment.
Right, this silenced, completely erased military coup that almost changed the course of history. So our mission today is to unpack this pivotal event.
It's such a complex story.
It really is. We are going to explore the fatal miscalculations made by these top-tier generals and, the terrifying, almost incomprehensible reality of how authoritarian regimes actually survive.
And what it really takes for a dictatorship to collapse from the inside out.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand why this coup failed, we have to look at what was actually happening inside that war room and who was leading it.
Right. So to understand that room, you really have to look at the man presiding over it. That's Major General Mered Ngozi.
Okay, the chief of staff.
Yes, the chief of staff of the armed forces. And he is sitting at the head of a deeply, deeply fractured military hierarchy.
Wait, so they didn't all agree on the plan?
Well, no. I mean, the people in that room are not divided by ideology. They all want the dictator gone. That much is clear.
Right.
But they have fundamentally different views on the mechanics of what they are actually trying to achieve. You essentially have two competing factions in this room.
And it isn't a quiet disagreement, right? I mean, from what the source says, it is a fundamental clash of strategies.
Oh, absolutely. One faction is demanding immediate, violent action.
Like, shoot the plane down right now.
Exactly. They want to shoot down the presidential aircraft or force it to land in Asmara immediately. They are speaking the language of revolution.
They know the stakes.
Yeah, they know that to overthrow a dictator, you have to establish irreversible facts on the ground.
Because you can't unshoot a plane. Once it's done, you are committed. There's no going back.
Exactly. But the other faction in the room pushes back hard against that. They prioritize institutional stewardship.
Which means what exactly in this context?
Well, they argue that they must protect the civilian lives on board the plane. They bring up the international standing of Ethiopian Airlines.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they are acting like custodians of the state. They're deeply uncomfortable with the moral and reputational cost of blowing their own head of state out of the sky.
I was reading this part of the source, and I kept thinking about human psychology.
Oh, for sure.
It's almost like that classic bystander effect, but with a whole country at stake. Like, everyone is waiting for the other guy to be the one to give the kill order.
Yeah, nobody wants that blood on their hands.
Right. And while they're debating the ethics of this, the plane just keeps flying.
It just keeps flying. And that hesitation, that paralyzing debate over institutional norms, it doomed the entire coup before it even began.
Because they ran out of time.
Precisely. By the time they finished arguing, Mengistu's aircraft had cleared Ethiopian airspace. The window of opportunity didn't just close, it slammed shut.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is the psychology of revolution. Revolutionary success has a very specific prerequisite.
Which is?
The conspirators must be willing to burn the bridges behind them. If you are trying to overthrow an entrenched dictatorship, prioritizing institutional norms over revolutionary necessity is a fatal flaw.
Right.
They were trying to execute a coup while still maintaining the moral high ground of the system they were trying to destroy.
It's like trying to stage a hostile corporate takeover, but politely waiting for the CEO to leave the building so you don't interrupt his lunch.
That is a great way to put it.
You can't execute a revolution while still playing by the old rulebook. You just can't. You have to commit or you fail.
And their failure to commit had immediate disastrous consequences.
Right, because we have to remember the physical reality of 1989. Communication isn't instantaneous.
Oh, not at all.
They aren't sending encrypted WhatsApp messages to their co-conspirators. So while these generals in the capital just freeze up, what happens to the rest of the conspiracy?
It falls apart in the most tragic way possible.
Because you have guys hundreds of miles away waiting for a signal, completely in the dark.
Exactly. And that brings us to Asmara, up in the north, and the tragedy of Major General Demisi Bolto.
Okay, who was he?
He was the commander of the Second Revolutionary Army. Now, unlike the paralyzed war room in the capital, Demisi moved with absolute decisiveness.
So he actually took action?
He did, but he was operating on a catastrophic miscommunication. He received early false intelligence that Mengistu had already been successfully removed in Addis Ababa.
Oh, wow. So he thinks the hard part is over. He thinks they've won.
Believing the regime has fallen, Demisi immediately goes to the local radio station in Asmara and broadcasts a declaration.
Let me guess, the dictator is gone, the revolution is here.
Exactly. And then he executes what is honestly a brilliant tactical plan. He mobilizes the elite 102nd Airborne Division, putting them under the command of another major general, Kumlachu Dejane. They board Antonov transport planes, flying south to seize critical infrastructure.
Like telecommunications hubs, state broadcasters, airports.
Yep. From a military standpoint, the operation was flawless.
But the entire foundation of the operation was a fiction.
Exactly. They were launching an airborne assault to consolidate a victory that never actually happened.
Because Mengistu was not neutralized.
No, he was alive, he was airborne, and he was coming back. By the time Demisi realized the truth, the 102nd Airborne was already in the sky.
Oh, man.
They were committed to a coup that had no head, no political leadership, and really no chance of success.
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario for a military commander. You've deployed your best troops based on a phantom victory.
It really is.
And while this illusion of power is playing out in the north, the regime in the capital is waking up. The architecture of betrayal kicks in.
Right, the internal security apparatus.
Yes. The Minister of State Security, a man named Colonel Tesfaye Wold Selassie, betrays the plotters. He tips off the dictator's most loyal enforcers.
Specifically, Captain Mengistu Gemechu's Special Protection Brigade.
Right. And wait, I'm struggling to wrap my head around this part.
Okay, what's tripping you up?
I'm looking at the source, and Merid Negessi is a major general. He's the chief of staff of the entire armed forces.
Correct.
But the guy who arrests him, Mengistu Gemechu, is just a captain. He leads a protection brigade of maybe a few hundred men.
Yeah.
How does a handful of lower-ranking security officers completely outmaneuver the top brass of the national military?
It's a great question, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a core truth about authoritarian militaries.
Which is?
In a normal military structure, the chain of command is sacred. But in a dictatorship, formal rank does not equal actual power.
Oh, interesting.
Proximity to the dictator is the only true currency. The regime we're talking about, the Derg, which was this Marxist-Leninist military junta that ruled Ethiopia, it was designed specifically to prevent the military from overthrowing the government.
Ah, so it's like having the title of CEO, but the IT guy has all the administrative passwords and answers directly to the board of directors.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Your fancy title is completely worthless if you don't control the actual infrastructure.
Exactly right. The Derg regime was designed precisely so that generals who commanded massive, distant garrisons were ultimately powerless against lower-ranking officers.
Because those lower-ranking officers controlled the dictator's personal security apparatus and intelligence networks.
Right. A colonel in the security state or a captain guarding the presidential palace is vastly more consequential than a general in the field.
Wow.
The coup plotters had the formal titles, but they didn't control the regime's immune system. And once Colonel Tesfaye tipped off that internal security apparatus, the general's titles meant absolutely nothing.
And once that immune system activated, the failure of this coup wasn't just political anymore.
No, it turned deadly very quickly.
It became a terrifying, bloody scramble for survival.
Yeah.
The psychological collapse here is just staggering.
It really is.
Back in the capital, inside that same Ministry of Defense compound, the leaders of the coup realize it's over. And the choices they make tell you everything you need to know about the regime they lived under.
Yeah, the suicides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Major General Merid Nagusi, the Chief of Staff and the Air Force Commander, Major General Amha Desta. They both take their own service pistols and shoot themselves.
And they do it in the exact same war room where they had paralyzed the coup just hours earlier.
The irony is so dark it almost doesn't feel real. The men who couldn't pull the trigger to shoot down the dictator's plane end up pulling the trigger on themselves.
Because they knew exactly what awaited them. They weren't going to face a military tribunal or a public trial.
No, they were going to make Malawi.
Right, the Mekalawi Central Investigation Prison. In the Derg regime, Mekalawi wasn't just a jail. It was the black hole of the state.
Just a torture center.
It was synonymous with systematic torture and annihilation. Suicide, for these generals, was a way to maintain some final shred of agency over their own bodies.
Which is just so incredibly grim. And the ones who didn't choose suicide faced equally terrible ends.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Major General Fontabele, the Minister of Industry, he actually hid inside a bunker within the Ministry of Defense compound for 4 days.
Trapped in his own building.
Literally trapped inside the institution he tried to take over. When they finally found him, he was taken to Mekalawi and killed days later under, quote, mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, typical for that prison.
And then you have Major General Abera Pibe. He actually shoots and wounds the Minister of Defense to escape the compound, goes on the run in his own capital city for months, and is eventually gunned down trying to climb over a wall.
It is a complete collapse of institutional dignity. But, if the situation in the capital was a story of isolated desperation, what happened up north in Asmara was an institutional fratricide on a scale that is hard to fathom.
Because up north, the mutiny actually lasted for 3 days.
It did. But eventually, the soldiers of the 102nd Airborne Division realized the truth.
That the regime wasn't falling.
Right. The regime in Addis Ababa was not falling. The dictator was back in control. And these soldiers found themselves in an impossible position.
Because they had just committed treason.
Exactly. They had participated in a treasonous uprising, and the regime's retribution was going to be merciless.
So what did they do?
So, to prove their loyalty to the dictator and save their own lives, the enlisted men turned their weapons on their own commanders.
Oh my God.
They executed Major General Demisi Bolto and his senior staff in a hail of gunfire.
But how does that actually happen? I mean, how do scattered foot soldiers coordinate a mutiny against 18 elite high-ranking generals in a matter of days without a central command?
It comes down to how deeply the paranoia of the Derg was baked into the military structure.
Like spies everywhere.
Sort of. Every unit had political commissars. These were ideological officers embedded within the ranks whose only job was to ensure loyalty to Mengistu.
Ah, I see.
When the coup started falling apart, these political officers agitated the enlisted men. They stoked the terror.
Wow.
They essentially told the foot soldiers, look, the only way you survive the purge that is coming is if you hand the regime the heads of the men who ordered you to march.
So it was just complete chaos.
It was a spontaneous, bottom-up purge fueled entirely by pure panic.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The regime didn't even have to send execution squads to the north. The authoritarian system was so perfectly terrifying that it outsourced its own purge to the terrified foot soldiers.
That is exactly what happened.
The soldiers eliminated the evidence of their own treason by killing the men who ordered them into it. It's a chilling reminder of what happens when base survival instinct overrides all institutional loyalty.
It is the absolute destruction of command coherence. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 leaders.
Right, the source mentioned 18.
Yes, the historical record lists 18 senior officers executed by their own troops in Asmara. We are talking about the entire administrative and operational backbone of the Northern Command.
Unbelievable.
Men like Brigadier General Afwerk Wold Michael, the Chief Emergency Administrator, Brigadier General Tai Balakir, the Chief of the Revolutionary Police, operations heads, political officers, Air Force commanders systematically decapitated by the men they commanded.
And out of all the top brass involved in the North, only one guy, Major General Kumlachu Dijin, the one who flew in with the 102nd Airborne, somehow managed to escape the chaos.
Yeah, he went into hiding and eventually got asylum in the U.S.
Everyone else was just wiped out.
We also have to remember the 12 senior officers arrested alive in the capital by that Captain Special Protection Brigade.
Oh, right.
Men at the absolute apex of the military, the commander of the ground forces, the police commissioner, they simply disappeared into the machinery of the state.
So what does this all mean? We have a failed coup, dozens of top generals dead by suicide, fratricide, or torture. The dictator survives.
Right.
On paper, it looks like a total victory for Colonel Mengistu. But the sources tell us something very different. Why would winning a coup cause him to lose the country just 2 years later? That feels counterintuitive.
It does seem counterintuitive until you look at what the regime did to itself in the aftermath.
Okay, what did they do?
By purging its most competent, experienced military commanders and replacing them with sycophants, men whose only qualification was their absolute loyalty to Mengistu, the Derg regime, destroyed its own capacity to fight the actual wars it was facing.
Right, because Ethiopia was in the middle of a massive civil war.
Exactly.
The government was fighting these insurgencies, the TPLF and the EPLF. And just to clarify for you listening, those are the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, basically rebel groups fighting for regional independence and to overthrow the central government.
And the regime had to redirect its resources away from those front lines. Troops that should have been fighting the TPLF and EPLF were instead pulled back to conduct internal interrogations.
Hunting down their own guys.
Exactly. Hunting down fugitive officers, guarding against further mutinies. The paranoia consumed them. They gutted their own military effectiveness.
Well, they basically defeated themselves.
Yes. When the regime finally collapsed in 1991, it wasn't just because the insurgents had superior weapons. It was because the Derg had inflicted terminal institutional rot upon itself. The May 1989 coup, even in failure, was the fatal crack in the foundation.
Which brings us to this huge historiographical void.
Yeah, the silence around this event.
Right. It has been 36 years. The dictator, Mengistu, is living comfortably in exile in Zimbabwe. The Derg regime has been gone for decades. And yet no one talks about these generals. You have 30-plus senior military leaders who orchestrated a massive internal rebellion, and they have just vanished from the historical record. I was reading this part of the source, and I hit a real wall. Why erase the very people who tried to stop the dictator?
Because history is written by the victors, and for the victors, these generals were incredibly inconvenient.
Inconvenient how?
Well, when the EPRDF, which was the coalition of those insurgent groups we just mentioned, took power in 1991, they needed to build a new national narrative.
Okay.
And that narrative had to be binary, a clean, simple mythos. The Derg regime was pure evil, and the insurgents who overthrew them were pure heroes.
I get it. Good guys versus bad guys.
Exactly. But if you acknowledge that a significant faction of the Derg's own generals tried to topple the dictator, that narrative gets murky.
It blurs the lines.
It forces you to admit that the evil institution had internal resistance. Furthermore, acknowledging these generals would raise very uncomfortable questions about institutional continuity.
What do you mean?
Because some of the lower-level officers who survived the coup eventually integrated into the new regime's security apparatus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you overthrow a monster, you don't want to admit that the monster's own organs were trying to shut it down. The easiest political choice was simply to erase the May 18 coup from the public consciousness.
Just let the names fade.
Exactly. Keep the story simple.
It's a massive paradox, though. I mean, we have to be really clear here with you, the listener. We were just conveying what the sources report.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at their resumes, and these guys aren't exactly innocent heroes.
Not at all.
These men were high-ranking participants in a dictatorship that cost an estimated 100,000 lives. They oversaw brutal counterinsurgency operations. They ordered aerial bombardments on their own populations.
You're deeply complicit.
But then they are also the ones who sacrificed their lives trying to stop the madness. Makes you wonder how we're supposed to write about them. It's a huge moral paradox.
It really raises an important question about how we view the collapse of authoritarianism. We often want to believe that dictatorships fall purely because of righteous external resistance.
Like the brave rebels storming the Capitol.
Right. But the reality, as this coup shows us, is much darker and more complex. Authoritarian regimes usually don't fall just because of outside pressure.
So how do they fall?
They collapse when their internal contradictions become so massive, so undeniable, that even the people benefiting most from the system, the privileged insiders, realize it can no longer survive.
The immune system attacks the host.
Exactly. The generals in that war room had helped build the very machine that was destroying their country. Their attempt to break that machine, flawed and hesitant as it was, represents the moment the Derg began to consume itself.
It all comes back to that war room on the morning of May 18. That paralyzing debate over the dictator's airplane.
Yeah.
A group of men holding the fate of a nation in their hands, trapped between the brutal logic of revolution and the comforting illusion of institutional norms.
They hesitated.
They couldn't pull the trigger. And it cost them everything, their ranks, their reputations, and their lives.
It's a tragic lesson.
It really is. When we look back at history, we crave simple stories of good versus evil. We want clear heroes and obvious villains. But if the only people with the power to truly break a brutal machine from the inside are the ones who helped build it, what happens to our understanding of history when we purposefully erase the parts that make us uncomfortable?
That's a great question.
It's definitely something for you to think about. Thank you so much for